Music theory is a very controversial topic. I recently just posted a video about the geometry of music here, and it hit people in different ways. It was a mixed response. Most people had a positive response. Some people had a negative response. It triggered them. And we're gonna, in this video, talk about some of the comments because I want to address some of those. I'm gonna post more in another video about why music theory is so controversial, because I think it's more than just the benign topic of music theory. I think it goes deeper. There's a psychological perspective to it that I think is really fascinating. But here we're just gonna look at the spectrum of some of those comments, the good, the bad, and the lovely. These first comments relate to just saying that music is geometry. So here's what some people had to say. Eric on TikTok said, I just want to play the guitar, but now I have to study geometry, ... And then also Linda said, stop ruining music for me with math, gah. So here's the thing. When I say geometry, I'm just talking about shapes, triangles, squares, hexagons. These are all shapes that we intuitively understand. They're just relationships, spatial relationships between objects, in this case notes. When people hear geometry, they picture something like a protractor. They think they're gonna do they're gonna measure the hypotenuse of a triangle or something like that. That's not what I mean. So I'm not talking about a branch of mathematics. I'm using shapes like triangles and squares. Everyone has an intuitive understanding of these shapes. Like if I show you a triangle, you can recognize it. It's no more than that. You don't have to calculate anything. There's no math involved other than you recognize this as a triangle, therefore you understand geometry at a very basic level. And with the color, these geometric patterns are more evident because if you were using just letters or just numbers, or if you were using traditional notation, you for sure would not be seeing any of these geometric connections. But even with the letters and numbers, they would be obscured a bit. And with the colors, it becomes more evident because you can see the relationships between colors, between primary colors or secondary colors or triangles and squares. You can see those in color and they mirror the patterns of music because both color and music are cyclical and symmetrical, and those relationships, those lines, those connections, those geometric patterns, as simple as that, they are what make music. So that's what I'm talking about when I say geometry. So you don't have to get out, you can put your protractor away. There's no need for it. We're just talking music theory. All right, along the lines of trying to understand music theory, there's another comment by Tim who said, I don't use music theory to create, but it's fascinating. So it is fascinating. I agree that these patterns and the fact that music is symmetrical, cyclical, and very consistent in this way is super fascinating. But I do want to comment on saying that you don't use music theory. Here's the thing. I thought I didn't need music theory back in the day. So I was with you, Tim. But it actually is music theory that is informing all of these patterns, whether you know it or not. You may have an intuitive sense of music theory, and that's awesome. Music theory does apply though. So to say, for example, that if you just go for a walk, you're not using physics. Well, actually walking is basically just falling forward. You're using gravity. You're just playing with gravity and balance. You don't have to be a physicist for that. You just know how to do it because you have an intuitive sense through experience and doing it. And likewise, if you were to play basketball, you don't have to know, like if you shoot a free throw, you don't have to calculate the parabola and understand how that ball is moving through space and know the physics of that. But if you're playing basketball, you are a practicing physicist. And so in the same way that you don't have to understand gravity or physics to live in the world, you don't have to have a conscious understanding of music theory to use music theory. And it may be that you're fine not using music theory, or I should say, not knowing that you're using music theory now or indefinitely. If it's working for you, that's awesome. At some point, you may get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm kind of hitting my limit on what I can do. And at that point, that's when you can look into music theory and understanding the patterns and really understanding what you're doing. And that's when it becomes useful. That was the case with me. And with pretty much anyone who gets into theory, at some point, running off intuition isn't enough. Getting into understanding why you're doing what you're doing makes a lot of sense. Some of the other comments were about how this idea of the geometry of music seems complex. So let's look at some of those. FP said, this interpretation isn't really that useful. You're not getting anything out of the shapes assignment. And then also user this number said, somehow you've made music theory even more complex than it already is when trying to simplify it, which is too bad that, that's the interpretation, and ironic because music theory simplifies things. And so, it can seem complex. For me and for many of you, seeing these patterns, seeing that they're consistent from one key to the next does simplify things. And so, there's room for everyone. This approach might not align with the way that you see things. For me, and like I say, many of you, it's more intuitive and natural than the man-made medieval arbitrary system of traditional notation, which has been the status quo for so long, and basically been the gatekeeper to people accessing music, which is more intuitive. Music theory is as beautiful and intuitive as music itself. If that doesn't come across on TikTok, a 60-second video, or on here being a 12-minute video, it may take a little time to have these patterns soak in, see the practical application. This is for sure the video that I'm talking about, just an intro to these patterns. So, you may also be in that phase where seeking this out and wanting to really understand, you may not be at that stage. If you are, that's awesome because there's so much more based on these patterns. And then Mirror, or Gone I Hope Someday, said witchcraft. So that's interesting. I don't necessarily see the witchcraft, but so for example, let's take the chromatic scale and we play a pentatonic scale. So, we've got C, D, E, G, A, C. We have this cool looking geometric pattern and we spin it this way and, oh damn. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next question then. All right, another comment on the complexity of this was from the Guitar Dojo, Nick Morrison. It looks like it was edited, so we missed the last few chapters of this comment, but the first sentence starts, "This is literally the most confusing lesson on theory I've ever seen in my life, and I studied Schenkerian analysis at music college, LOL." And then it goes on to say that basically this is a misguided approach and that music is not geometry. So on that, Heinrich Schenker in Schenkerian analysis, first off, kudos to Schenker for being unusual and taking a different approach than just the status quo and standard traditional notation. That definitely takes guts, and he had some interesting ideas for sure. Schenkerian analysis, though, I don't want to say completely misses the boat, but Heinrich was so tied to traditional notation and trying to depict music theory through notation that it hog-tied his ability to make especially useful insights into theory. So it's understandable. What I'm showing is a paradigm shift. And so if that's the approach you're coming from, traditional notation and those kinds of methods, then this might seem like a foreign language to you. For me and for many, it actually is a more intuitive, direct look at these patterns of music theory. But the internet is a big place and there's room for all of us. So if what I'm showing, if this is not quite the approach that makes sense to you, Nick has a channel on YouTube and his approach might make sense. So if you want to check that out, you might want to give that a look. One more thing along the lines of traditional study and Schenkerian analysis or whatever it might be, titles, I think in the realm of music aren't as important or interesting, frankly, as insight. And so titles, don't care so much about that. If you have insight and useful insight that's going to help, that's where it's at. Like I say, many of you found the last video helpful, and so here are some of the comments along those lines. ML said, "Thanks, man. It is a totally new perspective to me." Awesome. It is definitely a paradigm shift to look at music not through the traditional lens of, standard notation or standard instrument chord diagrams or through the alphanumeric characters that are often used to depict sound. So I'm glad it's helpful, and like I say, there's a lot more to come that elaborate on these patterns and how they're applied in music. Robert said, "This is an invaluable theory lesson, one of the more profound and useful I've ever had. Thank you." Awesome. That feedback is very helpful, and this approach helps me, and I'm glad it helps you too. And then C. Kathman said, "Thank you for making the point that sheet music is not music theory." And that is definitely foundational to what I'm showing here, that if we tried to look at music theory through the lens of notation, it distorts and obscures these inherently cyclical and symmetrical patterns. I'll definitely be posting more about this to elaborate on the fact that music notation is not music theory, And if anything, it can actually be a roadblock to understanding for songwriting. It can also be useful too, but starting out with notation can really trip you up. So that's a good point, and I just want to emphasize that yes, sheet music, traditional notation, is not music theory. And then some people had questions about diagrams, how to use these patterns in their own playing. So Brandon said, is any chance there's a diagram I can print and keep by my piano so that when I play and improvise, I can start being mindful of the geometry while I'm playing? Definitely yes. There's a link in the notes to this video and in the Geometry is Music video that points to some posts in the community that include diagrams. So these aren't just pretty diagrams for the GWiz file. They're meant to be applied and used on the instrument of your choice. And so in the community, I have diagrams on this geometry, as well as hundreds and actually really thousands of diagrams to apply all of these principles to songwriting and to playing. So definitely check that out. Also, there was a comment by X who said, would a circle of fifths with augmented chords still create a circle like the diminished progression? So the circle of fifths diagram that I show is 3 concentric rings, and there are major chords, minor chords, and diminished chords. Yes, there is a version of this diagram with augmented chords, so you can be playing, chords in a harmonic minor based on that to play some really cool progressions, which includes an augmented chord. So I'll be posting more on that, but yeah, definitely check out the community where I'm gonna have lots of information on that. So if this is helpful to you and you like what I'm doing, please let the algorithm know that it's helpful and you like what I'm doing. And there is much more to come, so stay curious.